He was the kind of teacher every parent trusted and every student admired. Brilliant, charming, and impossibly confident. But behind Daniel Reeves's perfect smile and inspiring lessons, he hid a darkness that no one at Brookdale High saw coming. Lily, Emma, Sophie, Natalie, and Grace thought they were special hand-picked, understood, and valued. Instead, they were part of a web of manipulation spun by the man who was supposed to guide them. By the time the truth surfaced, Daniel had already crossed every line of trust, leaving behind a trail of betrayal that would shatter an entire community. Daniel Reeves arrived at Brookdale High on a bright August morning, carrying a worn leather bag and a reputation that preceded him. He was the kind of teacher every school wanted: young, energetic, and effortlessly charming. Within weeks, he became the center of admiration. His English classes filled quickly, and even students who hated reading were captivated by his ability to make old literature feel alive. He wasn't just teaching novels, he was teaching passion, or so it seemed. Parents praised him at PTA meetings, students quoted his lessons on social media, and the principal considered him one of the school's best hires in years. But beneath that flawless surface, Daniel was quietly crossing boundaries that no one could yet see. He made an art out of attention. When a student stayed after class to ask a question, he didn't just answer it. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and made them feel like they were the only one who truly understood him. He complimented their intelligence, their maturity, their potential. It was never overt, never enough to be called inappropriate, but it lingered just long enough to plant a seed of confusion. He told students that the world outside wouldn't appreciate their creativity the way he did. He told them that growing up meant trusting people who saw their brilliance. In his classroom, admiration slowly turned into dependence, and Daniel fed on it quietly. The other teachers adored him. He stayed late to decorate classrooms, volunteered for school events, and mentored new hires. He was the first to arrive, and often the last to leave. The staff called him the heartbeat of the English department. During lunch breaks, he'd sit in the teacher's lounge and talk about how much he cared for his students, how they inspired him. Nobody ever suspected the subtle imbalance forming behind those closed classroom doors. Daniel's phone, always face down on his desk, was filled with private messages to his students, messages that blurred the line between teacher and friend. At first, they were harmless, reminders about assignments, encouragement before tests. But gradually, they shifted. He began asking personal questions, offering advice about family problems, and insisting that they could trust him with anything. It was a small-town school, where everyone knew everyone. Brookdale prided itself on safety and community. The idea that anything dark could happen there seemed impossible. The hallways were lined with banners about integrity and excellence. Daniel embodied all of it. He became the face of school pride, the teacher who turned struggling students into achievers. When he spoke at assemblies, even the principal listened, like a student. He knew how to hold attention, how to make people believe in him. It was a skill he had mastered long before coming to Brookdale. He also knew who to choose. He noticed the quiet ones, the students who stayed after class, who seemed eager for approval, who needed someone to tell them they mattered. He gave them nicknames, shared his playlists, and lent them books he said weren't for everyone. They felt special, chosen. It wasn't obvious manipulation. It was carefully calculated trust. When they confided in him, he stored every detail, every insecurity. He told them not to share their private conversations with others, saying people wouldn't understand. Over time, he became less of a teacher and more of a secret keeper, a role that allowed him to move freely in their emotional lives without raising suspicion. By mid-semester, Daniel had become something of a legend. Students competed for his attention, teachers envied his popularity, and parents spoke about him at dinner tables as a model educator. His charm seemed unbreakable, yet some students began noticing inconsistencies. He promised one student he'd attend her poetry reading but didn't show up. He congratulated another for a personal success he had no reason to know about. Little cracks appeared in the perfect facade. A few students whispered about him spending too much time with certain individuals after school, but the whispers never went beyond that. In Brookdale, gossip came and went, and Daniel was too well-liked to be the target of suspicion. At home, Daniel lived alone in a small rented house near the edge of town. Neighbors saw him as polite and quiet. He waved when he mowed his lawn and dropped off cookies during holidays. His life outside of school seemed uneventful, almost dull, but inside, he was meticulously organized folders labeled with student names, lesson plans color-coded, and a second phone tucked away in a desk drawer. That phone, unknown to anyone, held conversations he would later try to erase. He often replayed voice notes late at night, messages of trust and admiration that reinforced the illusion he had created. Each one reminded him of his control, his ability to be adored without suspicion. What made Daniel so dangerous wasn't aggression or overt cruelty, it was subtlety. He knew exactly how to stay within the limits of what looked acceptable. He never said anything that couldn't be interpreted as mentorship. His greatest weapon was ambiguity. It allowed him to charm without consequence, to manipulate without leaving visible marks. Even the guidance counselor, who occasionally noticed how students talked about him, dismissed it as harmless admiration. After all, every school had a teacher students looked up to. No one thought to question why those same students seemed distant from their peers, or why they spent lunch breaks in his classroom instead of the cafeteria. By the end of the year, Daniel had built an invisible web around himself, a network of trust, fear, and silence. He was the kind of man people wanted to believe in, and that was precisely why no one saw the danger. When summer arrived, he received a teaching award for outstanding dedication to student growth. He smiled for the camera, his arm around the principal, his eyes bright with quiet triumph. The audience clapped, unaware that beneath the applause, a slow, unseen tension was building. Somewhere among his students, guilt and confusion were festering, tangled with admiration. And one day, that silent mix would unravel everything he had carefully built. But for now, Daniel Reeves stood on stage, the applause echoing, the mask perfectly intact. When the new school year began, Daniel returned to Brookdale High with the same warm smile. To most, he was still the man who could make Shakespeare thrilling. But for a few students, something about his presence had changed. The trust they once felt was now a source of unease. They remembered late-night messages that had crossed invisible lines, comments that didn't sound like a teacher's encouragement anymore. Yet, no one dared to say anything. They told themselves it was just a misunderstanding. After all, he was respected by everyone. Who would believe them if they spoke? In the hallways, rumors began to circulate in fragments. A few students whispered that Mr. Reeves played favorites, that some of his students seemed unusually close to him. One girl mentioned that he gave her a book, not from the school library. One, he said she should keep private. Another mentioned he had sent her a long message after midnight, praising her maturity and how different she was from her classmates. Most dismissed the stories as jealousy. Daniel's class was the most sought after in the school. It wasn't surprising, some might resent his top students. The rumors floated quietly, never reaching the ears of the administration. But the students who had experienced his attention started to recognize each other, even without words. It was a silent understanding that bound them in discomfort. If this story resonates with you or someone you know, remember that speaking up is a sign of strength. There are resources available, like the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE, that offer confidential support. Thank you for watching. If you found this story important, please like and subscribe for more content that matters. Stay safe. The morning the anonymous email landed in Principal Karen Lowe's inbox, she assumed it was just another parent complaining about grades. She opened it casually, sipping her coffee, until the subject line caught her eye. Your favorite teacher, ISNT, who you think he is. The message inside was short, but what it contained was deeply unsettling. Attached were screenshots of text messages between Daniel Reeves and several students. The conversations were filled with late-night timestamps, pet names, and an emotional undertone that was far too personal for a teacher-student relationship. At first, Karen thought it must be a cruel prank, but the evidence was too detailed, too convincing. Her hands trembled as she read the final line. He has been doing this for years. You just never looked close enough. Karen immediately locked her office door and printed the email. For years, she had trusted Daniel completely. He was her model teacher, the one she proudly cited in meetings and defended against complaints. A wave of betrayal washed over her as she reread the messages. They were cleverly worded, avoiding anything explicit, but still intimate enough to set off every alarm bell. She knew she couldn't ignore this. That afternoon, she quietly called the district superintendent. By evening, a confidential internal investigation was approved. Daniel arrived at school the next day, cheerful as ever, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. But the students sensed it. The air around him felt heavy, the usual laughter replaced by an uneasy silence. 2 days later, district investigators arrived, framing their visit as a routine audit to avoid suspicion. They requested access to Daniel's school, computer, and email. His official communications were spotless. But the IT department found something else: traces of deleted attachments and logins to unapproved messaging apps. The timestamps on those logs matched the anonymous screenshots. It was the first solid link. The investigators then began discreetly interviewing students. At first, most were too afraid to talk. But after being reassured that their statements were confidential, one of them, Ethan Cole, finally broke the silence. Ethan's confession changed everything. He described how Daniel had slowly blurred professional lines, turning mentorship into emotional control. He detailed the secret meetings, the constant flattery, and the pressure to keep their conversations private. His words perfectly matched the tone of the messages. When asked if others had similar experiences, Ethan hesitated, then gave them a list of names. By the end of the week, 5 students had come forward. Their stories were nearly identical, the same late-night messages, the same compliments, the same manipulative phrases like "you're different" and "I trust you." It became chillingly clear that Daniel had used a methodical psychological pattern. preying on vulnerable students by using mentorship as a gateway to dependence. It wasn't support, it was exploitation. When Principal Lowe was briefed on the findings, she felt sick. The man she once called the heart of Brookdale was now the center of a criminal investigation. She was advised to place him on administrative leave immediately. That Friday morning, Daniel walked into her office, smiling, completely unsuspecting. When she handed him the suspension letter, the color drained from his face. For the first time, his composure cracked. He tried to protest, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that his only crime was caring too much. Karen didn't respond. She just asked for his keys and badge. He left the building under quiet supervision, a shadow of his former self. But Daniel wasn't ready to give up. That evening, he started messaging former students, trying to find out who had betrayed him. He framed it as concern, saying he wanted to protect them from lies. What he didn't know was that the police were already monitoring his communications. Every message he sent was just more evidence against him. The story exploded. News reporters camped outside the school. Headlines ran across local networks. Beloved teacher, under investigation for misconduct. Parents flooded the office with calls. The town that once adored Daniel Reeves was now bitterly divided. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered the full extent of his deception. He had created multiple fake accounts, used encrypted apps, and meticulously covered his tracks. But he had grown careless. Hidden backups of his messages had synced automatically to the cloud, providing a complete, irrefutable history of his misconduct. When detectives finally confronted him with the findings, Daniel maintained his calm facade, insisting his words were taken out of context. But they didn't need a confession. They already had all the proof they needed. He was arrested quietly at his home 2 weeks later. The day Daniel Reeves was taken into custody, the town of Brookdale felt like time had stopped. The man who had once been a symbol of pride now wore handcuffs, his face a mask of exposure, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. At the police station, investigators laid out the evidence, a digital trail of deleted files, multiple messaging accounts, and a folder labeled mentorship plans that was actually a coded log of his interactions with students. Even faced with this, Daniel refused to admit guilt, telling detectives he was being punished for being a dedicated teacher who cared too much. Back at Brookdale High, chaos reigned. The administration scrambled to cooperate with the investigation while trying to calm terrified parents. Principal Lowe had every photo of Daniel taken down, his name erased from the school's website, but removing his image couldn't erase the damage. For the students who had suffered under his manipulation, his arrest brought a complex mix of relief and lingering fear. Their lives had been changed forever, and for Principal Lowe, the lesson was a painful one. Sometimes, the greatest dangers don't announce themselves with threats or violence. Sometimes, they wear a smile, stand in front of a classroom, and teach lessons they never truly believed in. Thank you for watching. If you or someone you know has been affected by issues like these, please remember that help is available and speaking up can make a difference. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content that matters. Stay safe. The students who had spoken out were placed under special protection, their identities kept private. Counselors were brought in to help them cope, but their healing came slowly. They had trusted him, admired him, and for years, believed his words were genuine. Now, they struggled with guilt for believing him, for not speaking sooner, for the friendships lost because of their silence. Some even faced online harassment from classmates who still defended Daniel, calling the accusations lies and overreactions. The community was split into those who wanted justice and those who clung to denial. Daniel's court hearings became a spectacle. Each day, reporters filled the courtroom, hoping for a dramatic confession. But Daniel remained composed, wearing neatly pressed suits, maintaining the same soft-spoken demeanor that had once disarmed everyone. His defense attorney painted him as a victim of a moral panic, a misunderstood teacher whose kindness had been misinterpreted. They questioned the credibility of the student witnesses, implying they had exaggerated their experiences. The courtroom was filled with tension as victims testified. Their voices shook as they recounted how Daniel's attention had turned from mentorship to manipulation. Every testimony revealed a new layer of his control, how he isolated them from friends, made them dependent on his approval, and used emotional guilt to keep them silent. The prosecutor presented a clear, methodical case, showing the timeline of his messages, the pattern of his communication, and the consistency in every victim's account. They demonstrated how he had deliberately targeted vulnerable students, using his power as a teacher to mask his behavior as guidance. The turning point came when digital experts recovered files. Daniel had attempted to permanently delete the contained conversations that left no room for interpretation. The jury sat in stunned silence as the contents were read aloud. What had once seemed like rumors became undeniable fact. Outside the courthouse, the town's perception of Daniel Reeves began to crumble completely. News stations replayed footage of him teaching, his confident smile now viewed through the lens of deceit. Parents who once thanked him now expressed anger for the years they had trusted him with their children. Brookdale High, once proud of its community reputation, became a symbol of failure of what happens when trust goes unchecked. During the trial, Daniel refused to testify. His silence was both infuriating and haunting. He sat motionless as victims spoke, occasionally shaking his head. The prosecution painted him as a manipulator who believed he was untouchable. When closing arguments ended, the courtroom waited in heavy silence. It took the jury less than 4 hours to return with a verdict, guilty on all counts. As the words echoed through the room, Daniel's composure finally broke. His shoulders slumped, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked small. The judge sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. A collective exhale, a mixture of relief and sorrow, filled the air. The victims wept quietly as deputies escorted him away in chains. The man once celebrated as a hero of education was now a convicted criminal. In the months following the verdict, Brookdale struggled to rebuild. The shadow of the case lingered in every classroom. The students who had testified graduated quietly, some even transferring schools to seek a fresh start. The media eventually moved on, but the damage to Brookdale's sense of trust was permanent. In prison, Daniel tried to maintain the illusion of innocence. He wrote long letters to former colleagues, claiming he had been betrayed. But no one replied. His name had become synonymous with manipulation. A year later, the town of Brookdale was slowly recovering. His name, once spoken with pride, became a warning whispered in teacher orientations. The school walls were repainted, new faculty hired, and the students who once admired him were scattered across the country, trying to build new lives. Yet, his presence lingered, a ghost that refused to fade. In the quiet corner of the school library, Lily Carter, now a college student studying psychology, returned to donate some books. Standing in the familiar hallway, she felt the weight of memories. The classroom where Daniel once taught was now a staff training room. She could still see him standing there, smiling, reciting poetry, fooling everyone. For years, she wondered if speaking up earlier might have changed things. But now she understood the fault was never hers. Principal Karen Lowe remained at Brookdale, though the guilt of her decisions had dimmed her once vibrant enthusiasm. She led monthly meetings on professional ethics, ensuring every teacher understood the boundaries Daniel had violated. She couldn't change the past, but she promised herself it would never repeat under her watch. The community, too, had learned hard lessons. Parents became more involved, and the school district instituted new systems, anonymous reporting lines, and digital monitoring policies. It was a world shaped by caution, built from the ashes of misplaced faith. Inside prison walls, Daniel Reeves lived a very different reality. The first months were filled with denial. He wrote daily in a journal, crafting narratives where he was the victim. But the silence from the outside world aided him more than the confinement. Over time, the world forgot him. Isolation began to unravel him in ways the trial never had. He read the trial transcripts over and over, and certain words haunted him, phrases from students describing fear, confusion, and betrayal. Late at night, he replayed the moments when he had crossed those invisible lines. He began to understand the enormity of what he had taken from them, not just innocence, but a sense of safety that would never fully return. Years passed. Daniel aged, his confidence eroded into silence. He attended group therapy sessions, but rarely spoke. When he did, his voice carried no arrogance, only quiet regret. Whether his remorse was genuine didn't matter anymore. The lives he had damaged were already rebuilding without him. Outside those walls, the victims of his manipulation continued their lives, finding strength in each other. They formed an informal support network, helping others recognize the signs of emotional control. Their pain had become purpose. Lily, in particular, led workshops at universities, teaching students how to identify inappropriate authority dynamics. She never mentioned Daniel's name, but spoke of the importance of listening when something feels wrong. Redemption for Principal Lowe came in small moments: a thank you note from a student, a parent expressing trust in the school again. Brookdale became known not for the scandal, but for the reforms that followed. When Daniel Reeves was finally eligible for parole, the hearing was brief. He admitted his wrongdoing for the first time, though his words sounded rehearsed. The board denied his request. As he was escorted back to his cell, he realized there was nothing left of the man he once pretended to be. The applause, the admiration, all of it, had dissolved into nothing. Back in Brookdale, the seasons changed. The school's halls were once more filled with laughter and hope. The story of Daniel Reeves had become part of the town's cautionary memories, spoken of quietly but never forgotten. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes, it comes dressed as kindness. And though the scars remained, so did the strength to prevent it from ever happening again. In the end, that strength was Brookdale's true legacy, born not from trust in one man, but from the courage of those who dared to tell the truth. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that matters. Stay safe and take care of each other.